Hello, and welcome to this episode of Central Valley Stories, Advertising and Public Relations. On this podcast, we talk history, trends, changes, and challenges with some of the region's veteran practitioners and agency owners. I'm your host, Professor Betsy Hayes, in the Media, Communications, and Journalism Department at Fresno State. Enjoy! Today, we are here with Judy Ganulin, one of our wonderful industry leaders, and we're going to talk with Judy about her fabulous career, including some really neat things that she has done in the area of PR association in the Central Valley. So to get started, Judy, let's give a little context to our listeners. Tell us about your career.
Well, I started out as a journalism major in college at UC Berkeley. And while I was there, I was a night editor for the Daily Cal as a journalism major. And then I had to eventually quit that because I had decided to graduate early. So I had to take extra courses and something had to give. And that was it. But after I graduated, I worked for a small advertising agency. And then we moved to Sacramento after my husband finished law school at Berkeley. And I worked for the Office of Consumer Counsel under then Governor Edmund G. Pat Brown. And he had originated that office. It was brand new. And that's probably my all-time favorite job. It was fun. I like to work with people. And it was the first time there had been a consumer agency. Other agencies had some consumer parts to them, but this was the one that was for all consumer issues, and be healthcare or grocery prices or groceries themselves or whatever. Auto repair. There were a lot of things that consumers had problems with, and they wrote to us and we got to help. So that was neat.
You kind of mentioned a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about why that was your favorite job.
Because it involved helping people, which I liked, and I learned a lot, and it involved working in state government, which was educational, and I enjoyed it. It was just fun. It was work too, but it was fun.
And then after you left that agency, what was the next step in your career?
The next step was an intermission while I had my children. We did that in those days. And then we moved to Fresno, where my husband was offered a job. And I worked for a small advertising agency in Fresno, working on political campaigns. And eventually I worked for a small publisher in Fresno. And then I went to the Board of Supervisors as a board assistant. And there were 5 supervisors and 5 board assistants, one for each supervisor. Actually, now that I think about it, when I started, we were half-time. I worked for 2 supervisors, but they realized how valuable the position was, so they made them full-time. So it was one for each supervisor after that.
I appreciate very much this part of your story that they understood the value of you all and made it a full-time per supervisor. That is obviously always great when that happens, right?
Right.
And then after that, is that when you started your own firm?
Well, in between, my supervisor was elected to the assembly, so he needed a field rep, so he asked me to be that. So I did that. So I still work for him, but in a slightly different capacity. And eventually I opened my own firm.
And what was the impetus with, obviously you had all of this great experience by then, but what made you want to start your own firm?
Well, it's hard to say after all these years, but I think it was wanting to do something different and to have more freedom to be my own boss. And do what I wanted to do. So I like that.
Tell us a little bit about your clients over the years. Did your focus sort of ebb and flow? Did you kind of stay sort of in a similar space with your clients? How did that manifest itself?
Mostly in the very beginning, you take whatever you can get, usually, unless it's something awful. But mostly I was lucky to have good clients, mostly nonprofits and small businesses. And then I started doing some political campaigns, and that was successful. And so I did more and more and more over the years.
Yeah. And you really established a neat niche for yourself in that space.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And while all of this was happening, you were involved with the Public Relations Roundtable and then eventually PRSA. To start, why don't you let our listeners know what the PR Roundtable was and why that was important at that time?
At the time, there wasn't a public relations organization in town. There was, for a brief period, the American Marketing Association in Fresno, but it only lasted a year or 2, maybe 3. I honestly don't remember now, but it wasn't very long. So there was an ag roundtable, which was people from different parts of the ag industry, farmers and bankers and packers and you name it, whoever was involved with the ag industry met it once a month at this roundtable and shared their issues and their successes and their problems and their greetings, whatever. And I thought, well, that'd be good for public relations people because we're all in different places. Some are in private practice, some are in government, some are in industry. And it seemed like a good idea because although a lot of things were different, a lot of things were the same too. So you remember Chuck Agata?
Of course.
And I and a couple of other people got together and we said, I think we sent out a survey first to say, would you be interested in a group like this? And we got a lot of yeses. So we set up a meeting date and we had the PR roundtable for a number of years. And then we got the idea that we should be part of the national organization. And so Chuck and I did arrange that. And he was the first president. I was the first vice president. And it got started. And as you know, it's still going strong, thanks to you and so many others over the years.
And it's so exciting. And the PR Roundtable, just to kind of give the listeners context, that started in the early to mid 80s, I believe, right? Or was it a little bit before that? Because I remember I was involved in it in the early 90s.
Okay, it might have been a little before that, maybe late 80s.
And then 1992 was our birthday of the PRSA Central California chapter, which, oh my goodness, right? When you think about that now, and it is still going strong thanks to your vision and Chuck's vision. Obviously, there's a need, as you assessed all those years ago, that PR people need to be able to talk to each other and get that feedback.
Exactly.
So speaking of that, what has been the value for you of things like the PR Roundtable and PRSA? How has it helped you in your career?
Getting to know other people in the business. And with PRSA especially, there were some great educational opportunities. I tried to go to the conferences every year if I could, and there's always something to learn there. And you meet people from all over, and it's just informative and it's fun.
And public relations folks tend to like people, so networking and all of that, of course, is lovely. So let's talk about a day in the life. Maybe let's just start when you first started your agency. Maybe kind of talk us through some of the things you did early in your career and maybe how that was a little bit different right before you retired. How did that kind of evolve in what you did on a regular basis?
It changed a little bit, not too much. I was doing campaigns up until I retired, which was in 2012 when we moved here. And I did some small businesses and some nonprofits. And that's pretty much it. It didn't change that much over the years. So that was good. I knew how to do it by then.
And a lot of what you did for your clients dealt with the media, right? Can you kind of talk about the types of things that you did for your clients and what went into those campaigns?
Actually, I didn't do that so much because those folks like to talk to the media themselves. So I sometimes arranged interviews or that sort of thing, but mostly people called them to comment on this or that.
So when you were leading the campaigns, can you kind of talk us through what were some of the activities that you did on behalf of the candidates or the existing folks? You know, what went into those campaigns?
Well, there were several things. Obviously, one of the most important was fundraising. So we put on events for them and we got sponsorships of different events from groups and businesses and unions and whoever we could get. And we arranged for distribution of materials like yard signs and big 4x8 signs and whatever we could do to get the word out about our candidate and how good he or she is and why you should vote for that person. And mostly people did, I'm happy to say.
Which is why you continue to do it, right? Because of your wonderful success. Yes. And it is fun to think about how all of those things are a part of campaigns now, even, right? Those are tried and true strategies. The fundraising, the events, the signage, obviously is also critical. So on the event side, you know, events are a lot of work.
Yes, they are.
What did you enjoy the most about doing the events?
Probably having the people come and enjoy meeting with the candidate and asking questions of that person. And it was a way to get the candidate known better in the community.
So seeing it work, right? Seeing the vision for all of that. That's so great. So, or how did technology impact your career? Because obviously you saw some interesting changes throughout your career. I know you retired probably on the cusp of social media being a crazy part of life, but everything from the mail and the faxes and the email and all of that was part of your career. Can you talk us through how that changed things?
Well, having email saved some money in postage and was convenient and faster. But even today, it's not quite as personal as receiving a letter from somebody. And faxes, of course, are great, especially when I worked for the Assemblyman, because the main office was in Sacramento and we were in Fresno. So instead of running back and forth, we could just fax. And it was, you put it in the machine and all of a sudden it was in Sacramento. Great. Social media, I must confess, I haven't done because, as you say, it really took off when I did. And what I know of it today, I'm not real fond of it, I have to tell you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a complicated venture.
When I first heard about it, I said, people just put anything up there. I said, you mean I could tell people I'm tall and blonde and thin and that would be fine? And I'm not, as you know. And everybody said, yeah, that's fine. Why not? So I just think it's a channel for misinformation as much as for spreading good information.
And that's actually circles back to something I know you were heavily involved with as a practitioner and as part of PRSA, the Public Relations Society of America, is how important ethics is in our space.
Very important.
And with social media, of course, because you do have the ability to go direct to consumer, there is a huge ethical responsibility on the part of the person communicating to be accurate and to not be, I'm not tall either. So I couldn't say that either. And so maybe can you talk a little bit to your commitment to ethics, both as a person and as a practitioner? Because I know that was very important in your career.
It was. And I made a note. I did a tiny bit of research before this call, and I learned that Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee started basically the modern public relations industry in about 1906. And Lee published a declaration of principles, which said that PR work should be done in the open, should be accurate, and cover topics of public interest. Mm-hmm. That advice is still good today.
I love that. And I love it when I get to talk to my students about that, because sometimes we have this idea that ideas from over a century ago might not be relevant, but you couldn't describe what we need to be doing more than you just did.
Thank you. Exactly. And it pays off. I'll tell you another story. When we put up the yard signs for the campaigns, I always told the volunteers, you have to be sure you have permission to put a sign on someone's property. But sometimes volunteers get over enthusiastic. And this time they put up a sign on the property of a man who didn't want our sign. So he knew who I was and he called me and he said, take it down. I don't want this. And I said, I can't get it done today, but I will get it done by tomorrow. He said that was okay. So we did take it down. But the point is that because he knew me, he felt that he could call and ask to have it removed and that it would be done instead of just tearing it down himself. Those things are expensive and, could have gone the other way. So I was pleased. And I feel that's because of my reputation. And
your relationships, right? And how, as a successful practitioner, you placed a huge value on those relationships. And he knew that he could call you and it would be fine. And you appreciated the fact that he didn't destroy it and, gave you a chance to take it away and put it somewhere else. So yeah, that's a really great story that could have not ended as happily, right? That's right. Yeah. And I owe it all to the value I put on ethics. Absolutely. And integrity. The hallmarks of our profession for as long as it exists. That's right. Unfortunately, not everybody thinks so nowadays, but that doesn't change it. No, it doesn't. And that actually means that we just need to be that much more of a model. That's right. Exactly. So tell us about an early win in your career, when maybe a fun, interesting moment that you were maybe really proud of at the beginning of your career. And then, of course, we'll talk about later too, but a fun early story. When I worked for the Consumer Council, there was just the Consumer Council, who was a woman, and myself and one other person in the office. Another woman, and an investigator who was sometimes in the office, sometimes not. So the first time the Consumer Council herself took a vacation, she said she'd be gone next week or whenever it was. And we said, well, where are you going? She didn't say. How can we reach you? We need something. You can't just, you'll
you'll be fine. You'll know what to do. And as it turned out, we did. And that was a big confidence builder, that she trusted us enough to just disappear into the atmosphere and not have any way for us to call her. So that made me feel good.
It's a really great leadership story also, Judy. I love that on both sides, right? I love it for what it did for you to boost your confidence, because obviously things came up while she was gone and you had to deal with it. And I love it from her perspective too, that she was smart enough to know that you had the ability to take care of everything. Wow, that's a great story for now when everybody stays so hyper connected on vacation, that maybe more of the story that you're sharing would do wonders for a lot of things. I love that.
I think it would, actually. Good point.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. I love it. I love it. I love it. Let's see. I don't want to ask you about your favorite client because, we don't want the other ones to feel bad, right?
That's right. And if you did ask, I wouldn't answer for
I know, exactly. And I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but maybe your favorite things about public relations. What was it about this industry that kept you excited and involved for your whole career?
I think it's just being able to be involved with people and with writing. And those are my two favorite things. And so it was kind of a natural combination. I was a journalism major, so that's kind of where I ended up, sort of. But even now, we still support local journalism, which is in grave danger of disappearing, I'm sorry to say. So, we do what we can. That's all we can do.
I love the fact that you mentioned writing because, again, kind of a theme for our talk today is how important writing continues to be, right?
Absolutely.
We might write shorter things now, but it's still really critical, right? To be able to communicate in writing.
Absolutely. Especially real writing. I don't consider text real writing, although I know everybody uses them, but they have a place, but it's not everywhere.
No.
In my opinion.
So what were your favorite things to write? Did you love the news release more or the annual report or long form? Like what was kind of your exciting point of writing?
I like the news releases, to be able to tell people what's happening and why it's important. That was always fun.
Yes.
It wasn't always easy, but it was always fun.
No, definitely not easy. And how those were distributed, right? That was kind of an interesting path. We talked about the mail earlier, right? And having to distribute them in the mail and then the faxing and then the emailing. But the core essentially stayed the same. Do you agree with the news release?
Yes, you have to write it and before you can distribute it. And that's really important, what you say and how you say it.
So back to email, were you an early adopter of email or did you resist it a little bit? And what about your clients? Can you kind of talk about, was that a hard sell or did the people in your world just sort of adopt it? Or was it a little rocky at first?
Well, I was a little apprehensive at first. I didn't quite see how this would work, but I came around before too long. And my clients were fine with it. Now I use it all the time, socially and personally and business-wise and public relations things. In fact, one of the things I do while I'm here is write a column for the monthly magazine of 2 different groups. So it's not a big job, but, it keeps my hand in and it works for them. Nobody else has to do it.
Oh, I love that. So you said you do 2 monthly columns, right? One for each organization. And is that for their website, for a newsletter? Where does that column go?
It goes to, we live in a Sun City and we have a homeowners association, which publishes a monthly magazine. So it goes there. And then there's a monthly newspaper that's published outside and it goes there as well.
And what do you write about? What are some of the subjects of your column?
Well, they're very short because they have word limits because they have lots of clubs and organizations that want to be in. But it's a review of our activities and our coming events so that if you want to participate, you'll know where to go for what. So it's pretty short, pretty simple, but it keeps my hand in.
And I know they appreciate it, right?
They do.
Well, and I know that one of the most wonderful things about living in a community where you're living is the variety of activities.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It's amazing. I want it. Yeah. I'm not quite eligible age-wise yet, but it does sound very attractive to have all of those fabulous things to do for sure.
It is. You can't possibly, at least I can't possibly do them all, but I am intrigued to try new ones from time to time.
I'm glad. I think that makes it fun for sure. So let's talk more about things that you're proud of, Judy. I know you've done so much great work, and I know sometimes it's hard to talk about that about yourself, but can you maybe share one or two additional things that you really can point to about really having enjoyed accomplishing during your career?
One of the things is when I worked for the Board of Supervisors, you may remember the medfly many years ago. Well, it was a problem in California. And as you know, we're a big agricultural exporter. And 5 southern states threatened to boycott our products because they didn't want an infestation, understandably. So I arranged a trip by plane for my boss and several other government officials. And we also had a plane for press corps. And I arranged for these people to go to 5 state capitals in correct geographical order, so they didn't have to backtrack at all. And they met with the proper people. And as a result, they didn't boycott our products. And the interesting thing about it was that at the time, our offices were in the county administrative office's space. And in order to arrange this trip, I had to commandeer a private office so that I could get and receive phone calls confirming this or changing that, whatever. And the CAO at the time, the administrative officer, didn't think I should be doing that. And he kept telling me I couldn't have the office and one thing and another. And I told my boss, and he said, well, you need it, you do it. So I did it. And in the end, it worked very well. And my boss was thrilled. We got excellent publicity, and they called off the boycott. So it was a success, a win-win, as we say now. So that was good. I was proud of that.
Gosh, as you should be. And that is a really beautiful story of a very stressful situation that could have had disastrous impacts.
I suppose, but I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, no, well, you didn't because you won. And it was such a great strategy. And again, going back to something we talked about earlier about relationships, right? And taking the time to have those folks go in person to the different places. And that's such a wonderful part of your personality, Judy, that, you made sure that they didn't have to backtrack. I love that part of the story. That's what I would have done too. It's like, no, we need a route that.
That's right. Exactly. And this one in the morning and this one in the afternoon.
And I love the fact that you recognized how important it was for them to be in the same room together, right? To have these conversations face to face.
Absolutely.
I think that spurred the outcome.
That's right. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it did.
Any other stories that you would like to share with us about your career?
Well, towards the end, as you know, I did all these campaigns. And one day my phone rang, and it was an older man, a veteran, who didn't like the way things were going in the city. And he wanted to run for city council and change them. And he said he had called all the agencies in town, and no one had called him back. And I did. When he first called, he left a message. I wasn't in. So I called him back, and he told me about this. And long story short, I didn't think his chances were very good, but I felt he deserved a chance to run if he wanted to. So I did take on his campaign. And he didn't win, as it turned out, but I felt good about it. Some things are more important.
Absolutely. And I think, again, we talked about integrity and character and the fact that you did return his call.
I just can't not return a call. Well, now I can because of all the robocalls, but in those days I couldn't.
And you knew, right, that was part of being a business owner and a practitioner. That was critical.
Absolutely.
So how do you think the changes in the PR industry that you've experienced throughout your career, how have some of those changes maybe made things better than they were when you first started, perhaps?
Well, some of the technology, of course, and I think there's a greater understanding of what public relations is and what it is not, and that has helped. But I also think there are too many people who are doing what they think is public relations, but it's not the right kind. There's deception, there's downright lying, and you can't have a civilization built on that kind of work.
No, you cannot. So rewinding just a second to your comment about people now understand a little more about what public relations is and is not, and I agree with you. Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what public relations is and is not? It'd be fun to get your perspective.
Well, I would say that public relations is the art, and it is kind of an art, of acquainting people with facts and information. And when they understand the situation, they generally respond to it more favorably. But if there's something you don't know, probably you're not going to be too interested in it or be more likely to be afraid of it, which is a negative feeling. And I think public relations' job is to engender positive feelings about whatever it is they're working on, whether it's a product or a person or a situation or whatever.
I love that framing, because then the channel or the way people are getting the information is, we're sort of agnostic to that, right? It's as long as we're introducing the people with the facts, how that happens is not as critical, right? I mean, the communication toys, of course, are going to evolve and change over time, but keeping that formula in mind, I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if you were to give some advice
Yes.
to the folks who are either considering this or just starting their careers, we'd love to hear your thoughts and wisdom.
Well, as I indicated earlier, it's important to be reliable and honest. And ethics, as we've said, are vital, and they stand you in good stead. And I told you my story about the yard sign. And also, it's good to be active in your community, whether it's through a business organization or a service club or a political group, whatever it is, even a sports or hobby group. You meet people, and that's a good way to tell them about your service or product. It's a good marketing tool, and it serves a good purpose to volunteer with something, whether it's the food bank or the Chamber of Commerce or whatever. It's important to get out there and establish yourself.
And that's something I know that I watched you do, Judy, in your career. And it sounds like perhaps that was both something you enjoyed and was also strategic. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
It was, but mostly because I enjoyed it. I mean, it resounded to my benefit, but I didn't do it for that reason. I just felt this was a good cause. I need to help it. That's kind of my weakness, I guess, is helping where I can.
Can you share with us a couple of the different causes that you've been involved in your career? I know that you had mentioned, you have worked quite a bit with nonprofits. Can you share a couple of examples about some of the programs?
I was on the board of the Fresno Regional Foundation, which is now the Central Valley Regional Foundation. I was on the advisory committee for Planned Parenthood. I worked with Senior Companions, Jewish Family Services. I was active in our synagogue and its women's sisterhood. I was involved with the Daily Californian Alumni Association, and I was involved with Town Hall, just a variety of different things, that reflected my interests and that I like to think made the world a little better place.
Oh, and of course they all did. And then, you got to know more people, which, when again, those people put them together and connecting, I think that's a big part of being successful as well.
That's true.
So anything else that you would like to add about your career, about the industry, thoughts? I'd love to hear anything else you want to share.
Thank you. I think that's pretty much it. There were some other things I was involved in that represented a little different aspect of the community. Besides PRSA, I was president of that American Marketing Association for part of the time it was here in Fresno. And as you know, I belonged to the Counselors Academy of PRSA, and I was involved for a while with the Fresno Advertising Federation and California Women for Agriculture and the League of Women Voters and the National Women's Political Caucus, which shows you where my interests lie. But, I always seemed to be going one place or another, which kept me young.
So the Counselors Academy for PRSA, can you let our listeners know a little bit about, it was a special interest group of the larger organization, and what were some of the things that you all did or learned about in that place, just in case folks are not sure about it?
Well, in PRSA, there's the regular membership, and then if you've been in the field for 5 years, you can take your APR, which is Accredited Public Relations Test, and if you pass that, you get your APR, and that's a plus on your resume. And I think you have to be in the field for 20 years, if I remember correctly, before you can be in Counselors Academy, and you have to fill out an application and have people vouch for you, and so it's kind of a reward for all your years of hard work. But it's also an opportunity to meet people from all over the country. And it's a learning opportunity, as I think I said earlier, because there's a lot of the conferences always have good lectures in a variety of fields. So it doesn't matter if you do public relations in agriculture or banking or healthcare or what, there's always something for you to learn at these conferences, mostly done by the Counselors Academy, which has its own little convention apart from the PRSA convention. So there's lots of learning opportunities in the group, and I recommend it if you're in the field.
Thank you for that. Oh, I did have one more interesting fact that you might enjoy. The Fresno Ad Federation is reviving. So I thought you would like to know that piece of news.
Yeah.
And at this recording, they've done several events, and I'm sure by the time this podcast airs, they will be fully back in business. So I thought you would enjoy hearing that they're reviving themselves. So
good.
Because it's so important, as we discussed, for associations to provide a venue for people who are doing similar things to have their people.
That's right. Mutual aid.
Yes, exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, Judy, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us and share about your background and thank you again for starting the PR Roundtable and for PRSA Central California. So many practitioners have benefited from your hard work. I know that wasn't easy to assemble both of those groups. I'm sure there were a lot of steps involved. So thank you for all that.
It was my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Central Valley Stories, Advertising and Public Relations. Join us again next time as we talk history, trends, changes, and challenges with more of the region's veteran practitioners and agency owners. Until then, take care and be well.